So people developed antibiotics, everyone was like, antibiotics are great, and then everyone started using antibiotics left, right, and center, and now we've got a crisis of resistance. By cell number, if you count the number of cells in your body, you are more microbe than you are human cells. So these microbes are able to sense that disinfectant, and they've got an amazing genetic system that allows them to go, oh, this disinfectant is coming, let me change something. There are beautiful studies on the link between microbes and anxiety. In fact, they influence the decisions we make. Like, that's how important they are.
I am Holly Gardner. I am the founder of byMATTER. We have developed a range of wellness cleaning products due to launch in 2022. And in the process of developing these products, we were told we were crazy by almost everyone. But what really gave us optimism in this field is speaking to scientists and engineers within the cleaning field and within the microbial sector, which really reinstated the fact that better products really are possible, and that actually it is possible to create cleaning products that benefit our wellness and our physical health. Wendy, welcome. You're joining us from across the pond in Stellenbosch, South Africa.
Thanks so much, Holly. I'm so glad to be here.
Wendy, we're so happy to have you with us. For those of you who might not know, Dr. Wendy Stone joins us from the Water Institute at Stellenbosch University. Wendy received her PhD from Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada, and her focus area at the moment is environmental microbiology. She currently specializes in two fields, wastewater and microbial diversity in the built environment. And Wendy joins us today to talk about microbes, cleaning, and how our physical health is affected by the built environment.
Holly, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm always excited about the commercialization of the work we're doing and seeing it have real impact on those who are courageous to take it to impact. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Wendy. So let's dive straight in. First question, disinfectants. I think currently we've all seen how cleaning is now more important than ever before. With the pandemic, with COVID, we've seen how someone can touch a surface and it can spread a disease so incredibly quickly. So in light of cleaning, we currently walk into a grocery store and we see in the cleaning aisle, it's majority disinfectants and products claiming to kill 99.9% of germs. So I thought it'd be good from a scientific perspective. Could you just unpack a little bit? What is a disinfectant? How does it work? And should we really be aiming to kill 99.9% of germs?
Great, thanks so much, Holly. Yeah, so scientifically, a disinfectant, I think I'm going to answer that by looking at what a disinfectant is versus what a soap is. So those are kind of the two natural cleaning products we'd be using. And then now the alternative is the kind of thing that you're introducing, which is a probiotic soap. But if we look at a disinfectant and a soap, what they do is they essentially aim to clean the environment. So you're buying those products, you're going home and you're cleaning your home with them. A soap is essentially just going to disrupt the dirt. And it's essentially disrupting the dirt, disrupting the fats and stuff. So if you look at your dishes, the sink around your dishes, you'll see some slime developing there. What the soap is going to do is it's just going to disrupt it. And when you wash that down the sink, it's washing the dirt down the sink, but it's not very harsh chemicals. So it's not killing the microbes. So once you've cleaned with the soap, you've got a whole lot of living microbes still on that surface. If you're using a disinfectant, it's a much harsher chemical, something like a chlorine or a hydrogen peroxide. And what that's doing is, because it's a lot harsher, it's actually going to kill the microbes on the surface. So that's why they're asking you to use disinfectants with COVID, because the disinfectant is going to kill the virus, whereas a soap is just going to maybe wipe it away, and there might be quite a lot left on the surface.
In terms of disinfectants, what are their effects on our bodies?
So I'm not a physiologist, so I'm sort of much more confident in talking about their effects on microbes. But what is important is that a microbial cell and a human cell are quite similarly formed. So disinfectants disrupt cell membranes and kind of break cell membranes. And So you can imagine that we've got cell membranes too. It's not great for us. You can pretty much feed it if you put chlorine on your hands. You need to wash it off quite quickly. So we, for instance, they use chlorine. What I can speak about is they use chlorine to as what they call a disinfectant residual in our drinking water. And there are international and national guidelines that say if chlorine is too high in the drinking water, it is toxic. So it's not allowed to be over a certain level in our drinking water. So basically, disinfectants kill life. They're not great for life. They are toxic if you use too much of them. And so that's the effect on our body, so our cells. And then the effect on the microbes, if you've eliminated most life in an ecosystem that is meant to be living, those microbes are good for us too. So it's bad for us on two levels. I avoid disinfectants because it has an impact on our cells and because it has an impact on our microbiome, and the microbiome is good for us. There's a lot of studies showing that, so we can maybe talk about that soon too.
Yeah, so just one last question on disinfectants, because as I said, I've spoken with a lot of parents who they really want to create the best environment for their children to grow up in. If you were speaking to a parent right now, what would you advise them to do in terms of how would you suggest that they clean their homes to manage the control of microbes within the home?
Disinfectants, as much as many of the scientists are and much of the work that's coming out, including my own, and there's a lot of work supporting this, is that disinfectants are not great for us. Anything that kills life is not great for us. It is important to remember that balance is necessary. So in certain cases, disinfectant is extremely important. So there are rhythms around the home, and so I do a lot of work in hospitals, for instance. I'm looking at introducing probiotic life into hospitals, but there are certain areas that disinfectants are critical. So for instance, what we're looking at is balance in the built environment, microbial ecological life balance in the built environment. So you want to have these microbes that are getting in, like I say, 99.999% of them are good for you. However, your body is in a very good equilibrium, generally, if you're healthy. If you're in an operating theater where something is cut open, or if your child has an open wound, for instance, suddenly their immune system and their natural balance is not able to work. And then you need to bring in these levels of, it's kind of like our artillery to keep the bad bugs out. So whenever you're looking at something vulnerable in your environment, if there's a wound on your child, definitely disinfectants should be, if someone has COVID, you can imagine that there's already an ecological imbalance because they're coughing COVID everywhere. If, for instance, I myself use disinfectants in the toilets, so those areas where you know that there's a high likelihood of an ecological imbalance just because of the nature of the environment, then I'll introduce disinfectants. Again, I might use that in the bathroom once a month, and then just use normal soaps for the rest of the rhythm. So it's really just, and there aren't that many studies out there looking at what the correct rhythm is. I think what I'm really interested in is learning to step into relationship with our built environment again, and getting an idea of what your environment is like. And you can start getting an idea of where there's vulnerable spaces. If your child is hurt, if someone is sick, if it's a particularly dirty space. If you're using meat, for instance, maybe use disinfectant after there's blood all over your counter. So it's really just a rhythm and intuition and a perception of what is dirty, but then keeping in mind that you want to promote life in the environment too. So you don't want to sterilize everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to think that whilst we can't see microbial life on surfaces, there's millions of little cells engaging with one another that we can't see, at a microscopic level. Can you tell us a bit about your research into microbial cleaning, specifically within the hospital environment? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So this kind of leaps back into that, like, what is life on a surface? I think it started for us with my boss kind of looking at me, taking his finger, wiping it over a surface and going like, how many microbes are here and what is their role in the environment? And it became a project that looked at the hospital environment. And what we were doing is we were trying to demonstrate, or we were trying to explore. In science, you develop a hypothesis and you don't know if you're going to prove or disprove it, but we were trying to explore the idea that if you are walking around and say you cough a little sputum drop and it's full of pathogens, if it lands on a surface, so in the wider ecology, out in the natural environment, there's something called competition. So any microbes, there's tons of microbes, like you just so beautifully said, there's tons of microbes on these surfaces, and they're living on something. Just like us, they've got to eat, they've got to breathe, they've got to drink. So there's water and there's carbon, little dust particles that they're eating on the surface. And so they're sitting there and eating. And then if the pathogen lands on that surface, so within a wider ecological system, there's something called competition. So growth of anything in an ecological system is limited by how much food and water there is in an environment. So if a pathogen were to land on a surface and there's no other microbes, that pathogen has no competition for water and food. So it can basically just thrive there happily. Whereas if it lands on a surface where there are microbes on the surface, that pathogen has got to outcompete those microbes for the dust and the water and whatever they're accessing on the surface to live. And so we had the idea that if you disinfect a surface and there's no microbes on that surface, the pathogen that lands there from your spit or whatever is going to survive longer because there's no competition. So we were trying to demonstrate that concept, which we did. And so what we did was we looked at natural soaps, and then we looked at the control, which was just water. So we wiped surfaces with just water, a bunch of different surfaces, linoleum, steel, tiles, just water. Then we wiped a bunch of surfaces with natural soap at a certain cleaning regime based on hospital regimes. And then we wiped a bunch of surfaces with probiotic soaps. And then we deposited pathogens afterwards on those surfaces and looked to see how those pathogens survived. So, and then there was a disinfectant, obviously, as well, that wiped the surface clean. And what we essentially showed was that the disinfectant, which wipes out all microbes and wipes out all competition, allows the pathogen to survive longer on the surface. Whereas if you have soaps, which just disrupts the dirt, but the microbes on the surface still survive, they're still there. And if you have probiotic soaps, the pathogen is suppressed. So the competition on the surface means the pathogen can't survive as long. And I think it's worth noting as well that, remember, a pathogen coming from your body is happy at 37 degrees Celsius. It's happy, there's no oxygen in your body. It's not built for a surface, whereas the microbes on the surface are built for the surface. They've already evolved there. So they actually are already like primed to outcompete the pathogen. So what we're essentially doing is celebrating the microbes on the surface and their ability to promote the health in the environment. So yeah, I think that answers your question to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just on that one point about disinfectants. So effectively, we are using disinfectants, thinking we're cleaning, when in actual fact, we are encouraging to some degree the survival of pathogens. And for anyone watching, do you want to quickly just describe what a pathogen is and why we don't want pathogens to survive on surfaces?
So a pathogen, great question. A pathogen is any organism, it's those organisms that are bad for us, the organism that carries a risk for making a human sick. So that would be a human pathogen, and you get maize pathogens that make maize sick or whatever. And so a pathogen is something that is likely to make us sick, a human pathogen, and that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. COVID would be a pathogen. Escherichia coli would be a pathogen. And so, as I said, most pathogens out there are not, they're very few and far between. Those that might make us sick often make us sick only because our immune system is down. And in the same way, our built environment's immune system can be down. So we have natural biological systems that can fight off pathogens. So these organisms coming in that sort of might make us sick, our natural immune system fights it off. A lot of that, they're the microbes inside of our body. The microbes inside our mouth, the microbes inside our gut, as well as cellular systems. Like there's all sorts of white blood cells and T cells. And then in the built environment, in the same way, it's an extension of our own immunity. So if your built environment is healthy, again, your pathogen is less likely to survive. So that pathogen that might make us sick, it might incubate inside our body, for instance, If our immune system is down, we might have some pathogen incubating in our spit, and then we cough it out and it lands on the surface. And then our hope is that if the surface is healthier, there are microbes on the surface and we haven't sterilized everything, there might be some competition to minimize the survival of the pathogen. So like you say, that would then suppress pathogen survival. In certain cases, there are going to be exceptions, but yeah. Yeah.
Could you unpack a little bit, what is probiotic cleaning or microbial based cleaning, and how exactly does it work, especially compared to disinfectants?
Yes. So like I said, disinfectants kills everything. Probiotics are essentially the opposite of that. You'll see them introduced more and more. There is an awareness of the philosophy that removing microbes is not a great idea for our health. We're seeing studies across the spectrum. So you'll see probiotic products being introduced everywhere, from gut health to soaps to teas and milks. So the idea is that when a disinfectant essentially kills everything on the surface, probiotic cleaning or any probiotic product is going to introduce living organisms to a surface. And so what it's doing is it's really acknowledging this philosophy that our built environment, our body, it's full of microbial life, and that's a good thing.
From an everyday consumer perspective, the disinfectants that we're using in our home, granted, are probably not as high in volume and quantity as the metrics that you're working with. But, you know, if you look at the home environment, we've got washing up liquids, we've got laundry detergents, we've of course got all-purpose cleaners, but those stay on the surfaces. In terms of the disinfectants that are washed down the drains and that flow into the residual water facilities, what happens then? Do the disinfectants then affect the ecology, you know, from our home environment?
So it's going down your drain and it's getting to a wastewater treatment works, and it goes through a whole lot of processes there, and then it's released into a river. And I think the up until recently, the amount of disinfectants going in, there's almost such a mess in our wastewater treatment works that there's so much mess. So many chemicals, so many byproducts, a whole lot of feces and urine, that there's almost like such a big mess there that the disinfectant impact would be quite diluted. We have newspaper articles of our town pouring disinfectants down the drain during COVID, like sterilizing streets. and it's that kind of culture. And again, right back to my mantra, which is balance. So I do think it has the potential to disrupt it if we overuse it. But sort of what's happening, this is, I think, why so many people are going to natural products as much as possible, all soaps, all chemicals. I mean, we study a suite of what we call micropollutants, which are all of the chemicals, including chlorine residuals. And I mean, I'm stand under correction, but I think there's like over 75,000 different chemicals now, and many of them are recalcitrant. It's difficult to treat. So that's sort of the new horizon of wastewater treatment plants. So basically, like, keeping a life as balanced and ecologically friendly as possible, keeping all of these chemicals to a minimum is always my aim, at least in my own life. I study nature, and it's all about relationship with our environment. And we've just like broken that relationship, particularly in the built environment. So what we're also looking at, there's a lot of studies for promoting the reintroduction of plants into hospitals, the reintroduction of animals into kids' lives. There's a beautiful book called something like Let Them Eat Dirt. I've got a 1-year-old niece who basically during the COVID pandemic just put her feet in her mouth constantly. And it's just like every single thing, we're evolved to be in balance with the environment around us. And a probiotic cleaner acknowledges that and invites that in.
Antimicrobial resistance. Let's talk a bit about that, because it sounds like a big word. But we're starting to see, you know, the BBC published an article just a few weeks ago about how, you know, people are no longer really responding to antibiotics like they used to. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a shift in our immune response to antibiotics, disinfectants, chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
What is antimicrobial resistance?
So, that's also such a beautiful biological system, but it's so dangerous for us too. So what happens with microbes is they're everywhere. Like we said, they're all over surfaces and everything. But they also have a turnover time that's much, their lifespan is hours or days. So you've got generations and generations and generations on your surface, generations and generations and generations in your body over days. And as like we evolve, they evolve, which means the biome in your environment or in your body, it's responding to what it's experiencing. So it's responding to the antibiotics that we throw at it. It's responding to the disinfectants that we throw at it. So we do a lot of work on antimicrobial resistance. It's in the wastewater treatment plants. So out there, all microbes are becoming resistant to antibiotics. So these microbes are able to sense that disinfectant, and they've got an amazing genetic system that allows them to go, oh, this disinfectant is coming, let me change something so that I can do better, my progeny can do better. So much like we evolve, they evolve. They just do it very, very fast and very, very well. So there aren't as many studies on disinfectants, but there are some. In terms of antimicrobials, there are extensive studies, and disinfectants do very similar things to antimicrobials. So both of them disrupt the organism, and then the organism's progeny is evolving to go, how do we do better? And so what happens is then you have, so we're sitting with wastewater treatment plants. We have organisms there that when we say XDR and MDR, extremely drug resistant or multi-drug resistant, they are resistant to like 14 different antibiotics. And when we we grow them in biofilms. So that's basically the gunk that you see on your kitchen sink, the slime. So that's the microbes are in there and they've got all of that slime protecting them. And that slime allows them to be resistant to thousands of times the antibiotics that we use in hospitals to help someone if they're sick. So this is, it's an incredibly serious problem. They have what they call, I think it's like last horizon antibiotics now. And yeah, so it's a really big problem. And so any cleaning products that we're using that doesn't threaten the life of the microbe minimizes the chances of antimicrobial resistance being a problem.
So if I understand correctly, then what we're doing is we're bombarding these bacteria, these microbes in our body and in our environment in the hope that actually it's killing them, when in actual fact, it's doing the exact opposite because they have essentially outsmarted the chemicals and the antibiotics. And so that lends itself quite nicely to what is the forefront of chemicals? What is the forefront of antibiotics? You know, it has to be something that works together with the bacteria, the microbes, and doesn't just completely attack it. Otherwise, as we know, with antimicrobial resistance, the microbes will just evolve quickly and survive.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a beautiful synthesis. Yeah, so the forefront for me, I think goes back to that lovely question you asked right in the beginning, is like, what is a cleaning regime? So we've got the one part, which is we're always going to need antibiotics. And that is why this is a crisis. There are always going to be people who are immune compromised. There's always going to be someone whose immune system needs the help of antibiotics. So we want to keep using antibiotics, and we need to keep, so the forefront, we are developing constantly new antibiotics. Because the microbes are developing resistance to everything, we need new antibiotics the whole time. So there is amazing scientific work out there generating new antibiotics, and it's difficult things to do. It's called bioprospecting. So that's a beautiful side. But the way we can support them is by making sure that we don't use antibiotics too often. So it comes back to that balance question. The forefront to me is what has happened in science is, again, it's been a lot of like management studies and fear responses. So people developed antibiotics, everyone was like, antibiotics are great, and then everyone started using antibiotics left, right, and center, and now we've got a crisis of resistance. Whereas if we can continue this beautiful work that's been done on developing antibiotics and keep it for those niche, urgent spaces where we need them. Disinfectants is the same thing for me. We use it where we need it rather than using it everywhere. That to me is the horizon, is exactly what you're promoting with your company. What is so beautiful for me is generating a culture that celebrates balance. So antibiotics are great, disinfectants are great, but we need a predominant culture that embraces balance, so that we're supporting those people who really need antibiotics, but not using it left, right, and center, and promoting microbes to do the work themselves, the good microbes to do the work themselves. So really, the forefront for me is balance and nuance and just a celebration of life, and not just sort of artillery and death against all microbes.
Probiotics, then you could say last days. So it's an active clean. So you spray it on your surface, and because you're spraying microbes onto the surface, you're spraying living organisms onto the surface which are active. How does that compare to a disinfectant, and in terms of the length of time?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So a disinfectant, one thing I need to point out is that most people are using disinfectants incorrectly. So a disinfectant is probably not going to work unless you, so for us, we use, say, a chlorine-based disinfectant. We let it soak for 20 minutes and then rinse it off with sterile water, and then we can say something is clean. If it's not too dirty, super dirty stuff, we even leave longer than 20 minutes. So if you're going to use a disinfectant optimally, it's going to sterilize everything. But again, that system is then quite vulnerable because it's sterile and there's no life there. So anything dirty that lands is immediately sort of an imbalance risk. So it's going to be dirty immediately again. A probiotic soap, like you say, has the benefit of having living organisms that are adapted to living on a surface quite comfortably for an extended period of time. It is also a soap, so if you're going to mess something super dirty there, you probably need to wipe it off again, but those microbes are going to be still doing their beneficial thing for days afterwards, for sure. I can say that confidently, it's days afterwards, yeah.
On the subject of health, why are bacteria or microbes so important to our physical health?
Yeah, oh, that is a beautiful and such a broad question. Oh my soul. Your body is more microbe than it is human cell by cell number, not by cell weight. So human cells are bigger and heavier, right? But by cell number, if you count the number of cells in your body, you are more microbe than you are human cells. And that is not even, so if you start thinking about the fact that your built environment is further part of your immunity, that's not even counting the microbes in your built environment. That's just the microbes in and on you. So to me, and all of those microbes are involved in, so they're metabolizing all of the food that comes into your body. They're part of your immunity. They're bumping into the pathogens that are bumping into you and kind of going, no, get away from me. I don't want this. So they're part of every single process in your body. And like I said, I'm most interested. There are beautiful studies on the link between microbes and anxiety. Like they influence the decisions we make. Like that's how important they are. It's almost like they're important in everything, essentially. And again, I can link 100 studies. It would take a long time and be very scientific to explain how, but it's really just they're busy with everything inside of you. They're there.
Does the process of probiotic cleaning work on fabrics too? Fabric
is basically like a super snug environment for microbes. So the fabric is going to just like whatever is going to last a couple of days on a wood surface might last a bit longer on a fabric. So I'd maybe do it at a slightly lower frequency, but the concept is precisely the same. You'll probably anywhere have a lot more microbes on a fabric in general because they trap it. So your couch is breathing a lot of life on you every time you sit on it, that cloud that comes up. So I can't see any reason why the principle wouldn't stand for fabrics in the same way it stands for any other surface. We did studies on multiple surfaces and the principle was the same across the surfaces.